I heard the sound of skin hitting skin before I even felt the pain. A sharp crack sliced through the music, through the polite laughter of the guests, and landed square in my chest like a sledgehammer. My head jerked to the side. My eyes burned. My glasses slipped off my nose, hit the ivory marble floor, and shattered into glittering pieces. The fragments lay scattered under the chandelier light like 100 tiny eyes watching me fall. No one said a word. The violin music stopped mid-note. No one rushed to help me. A moment ago, this ballroom was full of flowers, champagne, and laughter. Now, silence so thick it pressed against my ribs. My cheek burned hot. But the physical sting was nothing compared to the pain inside, like someone had reached into my chest and crushed my heart with their bare hands. I looked down at the floor. My hands trembled as I knelt to gather the broken lenses. My finger slid along a shard of glass, skin split open, blood rising. I didn't cry. I only heard my heartbeat, slow, heavy, hollow. Out of 160 guests dressed in silk and tuxedos, not one stepped forward to ask if I was all right. Madison, my brand new daughter-in-law, stood in the center of the dance floor, the hand that slapped me still trembling slightly. Her white wedding gown trailed across the marble. Her makeup was perfect. Her smile, carefully painted and untouched, never faltered. She didn't look at me. She only stared at the house keys in my hand, like that was the only thing worth seeing. I didn't respond. But I saw Daniel, my son. He stood less than 3 steps away. Shiny black shoes, crisp white cuffs. His fists were clenched, but his feet didn't move. He didn't defend me, didn't touch me, didn't whisper, "Mom, are you okay?" I birthed that boy, held him through fevers, taught him how to tie his shoes, how to write his name, how to love. And now, while I was being humiliated in front of the world, he lowered his eyes and said nothing. In that moment, I realized I had just lost my son. Not because he died, but because he stood there and let someone slap his mother and stayed silent. I stood up, slowly, without a word. My legs wobbled, not from pain, but from shame. My blue dress trailed across the marble, leaving a quiet streak of cold color under warm golden lights. Someone coughed. Someone else looked away. They thought I would kneel, apologize, hand over the keys. They thought age meant surrender. But they forgot. I've lived longer than their judgments. I've buried friends and a husband. I've survived hospitals, funerals, and wars of the heart. A slap won't kill me. It only woke up the part of me I buried long ago. I walked out of the ballroom. The doors closed behind me. Music faded into a distant echo. The Charleston night air was damp and cold, stinging the side of my face. I walked past rows of polished cars, their surfaces reflecting the ballroom lights like silent spectators. I stopped under the street lamp. My hands were still trembling, not from pain, but from one clear thought. Enough. I reached into my bag and pulled out my old phone. The screen lit up, reflecting my face, tired, swollen-eyed, but no longer weak. The house keys were cold in my palm, the same keys I'd protected for decades. I dialed a number I knew by heart. The call was answered on the first ring. My voice was low, hoarse but steady, sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Marcus, it's me. It's time. Come to the ballroom. Bring every document. You have 30 minutes. No apologies, no explanations, no hesitation." I ended the call, closed my eyes. The night wind cut through my chest. Cold, but clearing the fog in my mind. From that moment on, my life split in two. Before the slap, and after the slap. And after tonight, the people who shamed me will face a truth they never saw coming. I sat in the driver's seat of my faded blue-gray sedan. The door shut behind me, shutting out the wedding music, the clinking champagne glasses, the polite laughter, and the sting of humiliation I'd just walked away from. Inside the car, all I could hear was my own breathing, heavy, like someone was pressing a fist against my chest. The street lamp outside cast pale light across the windshield. In the rearview mirror, I saw myself. A flushed cheek where the slap had landed, cold eyes, silver hair falling from behind my ear. A thin cut on my palm was still bleeding. I didn't care. The clock on the dashboard read 8:37 p.m. Marcus would arrive at 9:07. I had exactly 30 minutes to decide what kind of woman I would be from this moment on, victim or something else entirely. I leaned my head back against the seat. The Charleston air was cold and wet. Breath fogged the window in slow, trembling clouds. I didn't turn on the heater. I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted to hear my heartbeat steady and alive, reminding me that I was still here, still breathing. And I didn't survive this long just to let myself be erased. Then memory swept in. I remembered the way Madison entered our lives, not with love, but with calculation. She didn't look at my home like someone seeing her future family. She looked at it the way a realtor looks at property value. I remembered the slow change in Daniel, my son, who once brought me tulips every Mother's Day. It began with canceling our weekly dinners because Madison didn't feel comfortable. Then came the quiet accusations, disguised as concern. "Mom, it's not safe for you to live alone. Your condo is too big for one person. That old car of yours, it's embarrassing. You should let it go." I remembered 3 days before the wedding, Madison's family sitting in my living room with faces full of false sympathy. They slid a brochure for an assisted living facility across the table. Someone said, "You shouldn't be alone at your age. Let us take care of you." And Daniel? He sat there in silence. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. I smiled, poured them tea, and said, "Thank you for your concern. But I still know how to live my own life." No one knew that after they left, I walked into my bedroom, closed the door, and cried, quietly, so even the walls wouldn't hear. A phone notification pulled me back. "Marcus, on the way. 20 minutes. Are you sure?" I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers trembled, but I typed without hesitation. "Absolutely." I opened the glove compartment. Inside was a worn brown folder, a folder I hadn't touched in years. Tonight I opened it. The first page, my late husband Robert's will, handwritten before cancer took him. Ink blurred where tears, his or mine, had fallen. I traced his name with my finger. Just for a moment I felt his warmth again. Then I laid out the rest. Title deed to the commercial building on Meeting Street, currently leased to boutique stores. Investment account statements. $5,487,000 saved over a lifetime of discipline and sacrifice. Rental agreements for the beach house on Hilton Head Island. Bank transfers. $4,500 every month for 36 months, quietly wired to Daniel to help pay his debts. He thought it was a company bonus. Madison probably thought it was inheritance money. No one knew. It was my own investment savings. Money I gave without a word because I wanted my son to breathe, not drown in shame. Yet tonight he stood there, watched me get slapped, and said nothing. The dashboard clock blinked. 8:50 p.m. 17 minutes left. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against the steering wheel. I didn't cry. My heart was beating calmly, almost unnaturally calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of losing Daniel. I was afraid of losing myself. 8:57 p.m. Headlights swept across the parking lot. A black Mercedes pulled in. Marcus stepped out, immaculate suit, leather briefcase in hand. He looked at me through the windshield, eyes asking one silent question. "Are you ready?" I opened the car door. No trembling, no silence. No more being the quiet mother who takes the slap. I only said one thing, cold as steel. "Let's go, Marcus." It's time they learn exactly who they just laid their hands on. I can't tell you the exact moment things changed. When Daniel stopped calling every night. When he stopped hugging me goodbye after each visit. Or when his eyes began to look at me like I was a stranger. But I can tell you the exact moment I first felt unwelcome in my own son's life. It was the day Madison walked into my home. It was a soft gray March afternoon in Charleston. The air smelled faintly of magnolias. Daniel texted me, "Mom, I'm bringing my girlfriend for dinner. Just something simple, okay?" I was so happy I bought fresh flowers, set the table nicely, and made rosemary roasted chicken, his childhood favorite. And then Madison arrived. She didn't hug me like polite girls often do when meeting their boyfriend's mother. She simply stood at the doorway, gaze sweeping through my living room. The beige sofa I'd kept for years, the hand-embroidered tablecloth I'd stitched, the framed photo of my late husband on the wall. Her eyes weren't curious. They weren't warm. They were calculating, like someone appraising real estate. How many square feet? What's the resale value? Hardwood or laminate floors? Her lips curved, not in a smile but in a thin, tight line. She didn't say it out loud, but I heard the words in her mind as clearly as if she had spoken them. This is where he grew up? Right then and there I knew. She hadn't entered my home with love. She entered with a measuring scale. And from that moment, the little cuts began. Madison rarely said something directly. She didn't have to. Her eyes did all the talking. When I served dinner, she ate one polite bite, nodded, and set her fork down like she'd just completed some painful obligation. When Daniel told childhood stories, camping with me at Isle of Palms, the wooden boat his father built for him, Madison stared at the ceiling, bored. But the thing that chilled me the most was the way she looked at my home. Not like it was my home, but like it was future property. And slowly, Daniel changed too. He still visited, but he stopped bringing his easy smile with him. He no longer asked, "Mom, need help with anything?" Instead, it became, "Madison thinks you should get a new car. Yours looks old." Then the apartment became the next target. It started gently. "Mom, it's a lot of space for just one person. Wouldn't a smaller place be easier to maintain?" I smiled, poured tea, nodded, politely pretending not to understand. But I did. I understood perfectly. I remember one evening, about a year ago. Madison stood on my balcony, a glass of white wine in hand, staring at historic Charleston below with a cold kind of fascination. And then she said, almost kindly, "This apartment must be worth a lot. Old Town view, close to the Ashley River. If you sold it, you'd make a fortune. I mean, why keep it? You're old. You don't need this much space." I stood beside her, the city lights flickering below us. In that moment, I wasn't a mother. I was an inconvenience holding the deed. I answered only one thing. "Madison, some things aren't for sale." She turned to me. For the first time, there was no mask in her eyes. "I know, but money makes life easier." And I realized, this wasn't a girl who loved my son. This was a woman who saw potential investments. After that came the little wounds. Small, sharp, constant. I brought home apple pie for Daniel. "You still eat sugar at your age." I wore the sweater my husband knitted before he died. You don't think that's outdated? I worked part-time at a flower shop. Most people your age travel. Why are you still working? I said nothing, just listened. Each comment was a drop of water. I kept holding it all in. Until tonight, when it finally spilled over as a slap. Not just Madison's slap, but the slap of every time I'd stayed silent just to keep the peace. Every time I let someone else decide what I was worth. Now, sitting in my parked car, I check the dashboard clock. 14 minutes left before Marcus arrives. I think about all the times I stayed quiet for the sake of love. All the times I let myself be small so others could feel big. And I finally understand. Every silence brought me to this moment. Tonight, that ends. Headlights break through the Charleston fog. Marcus. I take a long breath, smooth my hair, wipe the last trace of tears off my cheek. Not to look pretty, but to look present. My cheek still burns, but my heart is cold and clear as ice. I open the car door. Tonight, Madison won't be the only one people notice. Tonight, it's my turn. I used to believe that there was nothing more cruel than being betrayed by someone you love. I was wrong. There is something worse. Betrayal dressed up as, "We're doing this for your own good, Mom." As, "It's for the future of our family." As, "We just want to take care of you." I only understood that fully one rainy Charleston afternoon a few months ago, when Marcus brought me the first set of documents. It was drizzling outside. I was polishing my wedding photo, my younger self smiling beside Robert, when the doorbell rang. Marcus stood there, rain dripping from his coat. "I found it," he said quietly. We sat in the kitchen, not the living room. The kitchen always felt safer. He placed a thick file of papers on the wooden table. Water was still sliding off his sleeves. My heart pounded as I looked at it, as if my fate was sealed inside. Marcus opened the file. His voice was calm, steady, but every sentence cut like a knife. Daniel owes $52,000 in credit card debt. Madison still owes $18,000 in student loans. Together, they took a $48,000 personal loan for the wedding and luxury honeymoon. Their apartment was on the verge of eviction, 3 months unpaid rent. Madison's luxury SUV was in repossession status. I stared at those numbers, unable to reconcile them with the boy I raised, the little boy who saved his allowance to buy me birthday gifts, who once said, "Mom, I'll take care of you when I grow up." I only managed to whisper, What were they planning to do? Marcus didn't answer with words. He slid a printed email across the table. It was between Madison and her mother. Her condo is worth at least $1.2 million. If we convince her to move into assisted living, Daniel and I could stay there for a while, or sell it before she gets too old and loses mental clarity. I read that line over and over. Before she gets dementia. My hands started to tremble, not because of fear, but because of how cold those words felt. And they were talking about me. Marcus looked at me with quiet sadness. This isn't the worst part. He laid down another document. Emails to banks and insurance companies. Sender, Daniel Parker. Subject, legal authority if parent is mentally unfit. Questions like, how do I obtain full financial control if my mother is declared incompetent? If my mother shows signs of memory loss, do I have the right to sell her property? It was my son, my own child, researching how to legally take everything from me, while still telling me, "Don't worry, Mom, it's all for your safety." But it still wasn't the end. Marcus produced one final report. Financial investigation, Daniel and Madison Parker. That's when I realized they didn't just want my condo. They wanted a lifeboat, a safety net for the debt they'd wrapped around themselves like chains. My savings, my house, my name on a signature line. They were waiting for me to sign the papers granting financial power of attorney. And if I refused, they were preparing to prove I was mentally unfit to make decisions. I closed my eyes, and all I could see wasn't my grown son, but the little boy who used to fall asleep curled against me during thunderstorms. That boy was gone. That afternoon I didn't cry. I simply asked Marcus, "What do I do now?" He held my gaze. "You have two choices. Stay silent and lose everything, or face them, right now." I thought of every time I stayed quiet, when Daniel repeated Madison's words instead of his own, when they brought brochures for nursing homes, when a lawyer showed up in my kitchen to talk about end-of-life decisions. I stayed quiet for peace. The slap in the ballroom ended that. I looked at Marcus and said, "I choose to fight." Back to the present, sitting in my car outside the ballroom, 8:58 p.m., less than 10 minutes before Marcus arrives. The wind from the Ashley River is cold and damp, but inside me, there's fire. I no longer feel ashamed about being slapped. I no longer feel like a victim. I feel one thing: clarity. I once saved them from debt, from shame, from failure, using my own money. I shielded my son from the world, and they wanted to take the roof above my head and the last piece of dignity I owned. Not tonight. Tonight, they'll learn exactly who they tried to break. I let them think I was poor. I let them believe I was frail, dependent on my pension and a part-time job at the flower shop. I let my daughter-in-law call me a clingy old woman in my own home. I let Daniel, my son, the child I carried, raised, and loved, believe that this cozy little apartment was the only thing I owned in this world. I let them think that, because I chose to. But the truth has never been as simple as what people see on the surface. 30 years ago, before my husband Robert passed away, he wasn't just some ordinary office employee like everyone assumed. He was a quiet real estate investor. No luxury cars, no charity galas, no interviews in glossy magazines. He just bought old buildings, fixed them up, rented them out. Every investment he made was as precise as if he already knew what Charleston would become decades later. We didn't live in a mansion. We didn't drive expensive cars. No country club dinners, no society events. We lived in a small house with a porch full of potted flowers and a dusty garage full of gardening tools. People thought we were just an average middle-class family. Only Robert and I knew beneath that quiet life was a fortune slowly growing every year. When Robert was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 56, he didn't cry. Neither did I. But in his last 9 months, he wrote dozens of letters and signed many documents. Right before he died, he placed his hand over mine and said, the last words I still hear clearly in my mind. "Elle, don't let money destroy your life or our son's. Live simply. Peace is sometimes worth more than anything in a bank account." He died in our own bed, not in a hospital. No machines, no fluorescent lights. Just the sound of the wind from the window and my hand holding his until the end. And I kept that promise for 30 long years. After the funeral, Robert's lawyer handed me a locked box. Inside were documents I had never seen. The deed to a 3-story building on Meeting Street, right in the heart of Charleston. First floor, a cafe. Second, a law office. Third, an art studio. Net income over $50,000 a month. The deed to a beach house in Hilton Head Island, where we once dreamed of retiring together. A house that looks straight out to the ocean. After Robert died, I never went back. An investment account in my name, Eleanor Parker. Over $5.4 million spread across 4 funds. Every year, the interest was automatically reinvested. I remember holding those papers, my hands trembling. I realized I could have lived anywhere, traveled the world. never worked another day in my life. But I didn't. Instead, I moved into this modest Charleston apartment. I worked part-time at the flower shop. I drove my old 10-year-old Ford. I wore hand-knit sweaters and discount shoes. Daniel was still young then. He knew nothing about his father's wealth. I wanted him to grow up like a regular child. Someone who knew the value of money, of hard work, of dignity. So I hid it all. I didn't brag. I didn't lend money. I didn't tell neighbors. I didn't tell relatives. I lived quietly, just like Robert asked me to. But time changes everything. Daniel grew up, found a job, started a life of his own. And then Madison walked into his life like a storm no one saw coming. She didn't look at me as a mother-in-law. She looked at me like real estate. She looked at my apartment like it was an unclaimed plot of gold. She looked at my silence and mistook it for weakness. And Daniel, the same boy who once placed flowers on the breakfast table every Mother's Day, began to believe I was poor, helpless, and soon an inconvenience. I let them believe it, because I thought I was protecting my son from greed. But by hiding everything, I made a bigger mistake. I made Daniel forget who I truly was. The night before the wedding, when the window was open and I could hear the ocean from miles away, I opened that locked box again for the first time in years. The papers smelled old. Time had yellowed their edges. Meeting Street, Hilton Head, investment accounts. And in that moment, I realized I built a wall to protect my family from money. But that wall also kept my own son from seeing my strength. And that was my mistake. I protected him so much that he believed he had the right to remove me from my own life, just for a house. Tonight, when Madison slapped me in front of everyone, when no one stood up for me, when Daniel looked away, I knew my secret had to end. Not to show off, but to finally say to myself, Elle, you kept Robert's promise long enough. Now it's time to protect yourself. I closed the box. But this time, I didn't lock it. After I opened the safe and looked at the documents I had kept hidden for nearly 3 decades, the truth hit me with brutal clarity. I had protected them for too long, and now that very protection had turned me into the victim. That night, the apartment was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second cutting through the silence like a blade. I sat at the dining table, staring at the documents spread before me. The deed to the building on Meeting Street, the oceanfront house in Hilton Head, the investment statement showing more than $5.4 million. Once, these papers were Robert's pride. Now, they were proof of how far I had let people disrespect me in the very life I built. I didn't cry. Tears were the one thing I refused to waste. I only asked myself one question. What did I do to raise a son who thinks his mother is a burden? The answer came quickly, sharp as a knife. I stayed silent. I stayed silent every time Madison spoke down to me. I stayed silent when they told me I was no longer capable of living alone. I stayed silent when Daniel watched his wife humiliate me and said nothing. I stayed silent for so long, they believed they had the right to control my life. But that slap in the ballroom and the way my son looked away ended my silence. I reached for the old cream-colored landline phone, the one everyone told me to replace with a smartphone. I dialed Marcus. Marcus is not just any attorney. He was the only person who kept his promise to Robert the day my husband died. If Eleanor ever needs protection, fight for her, no matter what. When he picked up, I only said 8 words. Come to my house. Bring the files. Come now. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. He understood. He arrived in exactly 19 minutes. The night outside was cold. Streetlights stretched across his windshield like long, trembling scars. He came in carrying a leather briefcase. His coat was damp with mist. I didn't offer tea. I didn't ask how he was. I simply pushed the papers toward him. The building, the accounts, the beach house, Robert's old will. He looked at me for a long moment before sitting down. Then he asked, "You've made up your mind?" I nodded. "Enough. I won't let them push me into a nursing home just because they think my assets belong to them." Marcus opened the file, page by page. His voice was steady, clear, no sympathy, no sugarcoating. "We will immediately freeze all financial transfers you've been sending to Daniel. We will rewrite your will. We will file legal documents protecting you if they try to claim you're mentally incompetent. And if necessary, we will take this story public." I asked him, quietly, "If I do this, I'll lose my son. You know that, don't you?" Marcus didn't flinch. "Your son left you long before you fought back. You just didn't want to see it." I sat up straighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel strong. But I felt clear. Clear that motherhood does not mean becoming someone's doormat. Clear that I was not born to be used. Clear that if I didn't stand now, my home, my dignity, my freedom would disappear without a trace. We worked until nearly midnight. Every stroke of the pen echoed through the quiet apartment like steel against stone. I signed the order to stop the automatic transfers to Daniel. I signed the papers withdrawing my guarantee on their apartment lease. I signed a new will. Every asset goes into a foundation to protect elderly people financially abused by their own families. Daniel's name was no longer anywhere in it. My hand trembled slightly when I signed the last page, not because I regretted it, but because I finally understood. From this moment on, I was no longer the mother silently shielding her son. I had become the woman who was willing to stand across from him in court, in public, and in my own conscience. Marcus left at 1:12 a.m. The apartment was quiet again. Moonlight spilled across the dining table, across the new will still lying open. I didn't sleep. I sat there, holding the key to the safe in my hand. And I thought of Robert. If he were still here, it would break his heart, but he would understand. I kept his promise for 30 years, lived simply, stayed out of greed's way, protected our son from money's poison. But my silence is what cost Daniel his moral compass. My silence is why I was slapped in front of strangers. My silence is why they thought I had no voice. I put the documents back into the safe, but this time I didn't lock it, because from now on the truth would no longer live in the dark. It would walk into the light with me. I thought when I walked out of that ballroom after the slap, I would never come back. But now, standing at the edge of the parking lot in the cold, damp Charleston night air, I finally understood. Some doors don't truly close until you choose to shut them yourself, and tonight, I was the one who would close it. Marcus parked his car beside my old gray sedan. He stepped out, and this time, he didn't ask if I was sure. Maybe he saw what I saw in my own reflection earlier that evening, a woman who had stopped being afraid. In his hand was the leather briefcase, not just filled with financial documents, but with proof of a life I built and the weapon I would use to protect it. 12 minutes left, Marcus said, glancing at his watch. If you want to back out, this is the moment. I looked toward the ballroom, its golden light still gleaming, music still floating through the air like nothing shameful had ever happened inside. I only said one thing. I'm not backing out. We walked slowly from the parking lot toward the entrance. The night wind from the Ashley River brushed against my face. My cheek was still warm from the slap, but the pain had shifted. It wasn't humiliation anymore. It was clarity. I could hear Marcus's footsteps beside mine. Neither of us spoke, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was steadying. At the ballroom entrance, crystal light shimmered on the red carpet, as if nothing had happened. 2 staff members stood by the door, their eyes widening a little when they saw me. Maybe they thought I had left for good. Maybe they thought someone humiliated like that wouldn't dare show her face again. They didn't know. I wasn't here to be forgiven. I was here to end it. Marcus murmured, "They weren't expecting you to return, and definitely not with me." I lifted my head, my voice quiet but firm. "Good. The truth doesn't need an invitation." 9:02 p.m. We stepped inside. The music was still playing, soft piano. Guests were still laughing, sipping champagne, taking photos under the chandelier. The scene looked perfect if you hadn't seen a mother slapped across the face right in the middle of it. At first, no one noticed me. Then one by one, heads began to turn. Madison's friends, distant relatives, people clutching wine glasses mid-sip. And finally, Daniel. He stood near the center of the room, his tie perfectly knotted, his cufflink shining, but his face stiffened the second our eyes met. He didn't speak, he just looked at me, somewhere between confusion and fear. Madison was different. She raised her chin as if my return was an insult to her evening, but she hadn't realized yet. The real insult was still coming. Marcus didn't look at me. He simply walked to the DJ booth and quietly said something. The DJ blinked, saw who he was, the well-known attorney from Charleston, and turned the music off. Silence fell. Not the shock silence after a slap. This was the silence when people sense something is coming, something they can't stop. I stepped into the center of the ballroom, the exact place where I had been humiliated just hours before. But this time I stood tall. My voice didn't shake. I didn't call anyone by name. I didn't apologize. I just said, "I'll only take a few minutes. But if you were here earlier, you should hear the rest of the story." Madison opened her mouth. "Eleanor, this isn't the I lifted my hand, not to touch her, just to stop her. She went silent. Marcus placed the leather case on the nearest table. I looked around 130 people, tuxedos, silk dresses, half-empty champagne glasses. They waited. I began. No tears, no shouting, just truth. For years, I let people believe I survived on a small pension, a modest apartment, and a part-time job at a flower shop. I allowed that because I thought living quietly would protect my family from greed. Someone in the crowd swallowed hard. Marcus opened the briefcase. Under the ballroom lights, the documents gleamed, sharp as blades. His voice was calm, precise, unforgiving. Mrs. Eleanor Parker is the legal owner of a commercial building on Meeting Street, currently valued at $8.7 million, generating over $50,000 a month in rental income. Whispers rippled through the room. She also owns an oceanfront property in Hilton Head, valued at over $4 million. Her personal investment account contains $5.4 million. I didn't look at anyone when I spoke next. And for the last 3 years, I have been sending Daniel, my son, $4,500 every month to pay off his debts, just so he could breathe, just so he wouldn't drown. No one moved. Daniel stood frozen. Madison's lips parted slightly, like she couldn't remember how to press them together. I looked at my son for the first time in months. You thought I had nothing. You thought I was a burden. But you weren't just wrong about my money, Daniel. You were wrong about your mother. No applause, no dramatic music, just silence, thick and heavy, like wet earth. I finished with one sentence, not a threat, a promise. My silence ends here. If anyone wants to take something from me now, they'll have to face me, not a helpless old woman, but Eleanor Parker. And at that moment, the ballroom was no longer a wedding hall. It became a battlefield. When I finished speaking, the only sound left inside the ballroom was the soft, ghostly clinking of crystal pendants on the chandeliers, trembling slightly in the air conditioning. No one moved. No one raised a glass. Not a single laugh survived. Not a single face kept its earlier polished confidence. Everyone stood there, waiting, as if trying to confirm they had truly heard what they thought they heard. That I, an old woman who worked part-time at a flower shop, drove an aging Ford, and lived in a modest apartment, was, in fact, a millionaire. And that my son, the man standing in the middle of the room, had allowed his wife to slap me across the face in front of everyone. I didn't say another word. Marcus remained silent beside me. We didn't need to say anything more, because now it was their turn. Madison was the first to react, not with words, but with a sharp, shaky breath, like someone who has just fallen off a cliff. Her face went pale, her lips parted, unsure whether she should cry, apologize, or be angry. She grabbed Daniel's sleeve. "Daniel, what is this? Is she telling the truth? Did you know?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He stood still, hands limp at his sides, but he wasn't looking at Madison. For the first time all evening, he was looking at me, and in his eyes wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear of a truth far bigger than anything he had imagined. Fear of realizing he couldn't undo what he had done. "Mom," he managed, but then he stopped. "Because there are no words big enough to patch the moment you stood still while your wife slapped your mother." The whispering began. Soft at first like a cold draft, then spreading. "She's that wealthy? 50,000 in rent? Every month? And they tried to take her house on their wedding day? This is gonna end up in the news." Some looked at me with respect, some with sympathy, some were already recording. I didn't stop them. I had nothing left to hide. Madison finally found her voice. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her voice thin and edged with anger. "Why would you hide all of this? Why let us think you were poor and then suddenly act like some millionaire? Are you trying to humiliate us?" I looked at her, not with hate, just with a deep, tired sadness. "No, Madison. I stayed quiet because I wanted peace. I never wanted attention. I never needed anyone to bow to me." My voice sharpened. "But from the very first day you stepped into my home, you didn't see a mother-in-law. You saw property. She opened her mouth, but I cut in, calmly. And you slapped the woman who has been paying your debts every month without even knowing it." She stepped back, as if the truth had just slapped her, far harder than I ever could. Daniel stayed silent for a long time. Then he took one step toward me. Not to hug me, not to apologize, but like a man trying to find gravity again. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" He didn't ask it to blame me. He asked it like someone who suddenly realized he had spent years standing on the wrong side. I answered quietly. "Because I thought, if you grew up without needing my money, you'd become a stronger man. I wanted you to stand on your own. But I was wrong." I took a breath. "You didn't need my money, Daniel. You needed the truth. And I hid it for too long." His head lowered, his shoulders trembled. But I didn't reach out and comfort him. Not because I didn't love him anymore, but because for the first time in his life, he had to stand on his own. Guests began to leave, quietly, in small groups. Nobody wanted to be in the middle of someone else's family disaster, but they all knew. They hadn't just witnessed an argument. They had witnessed a mother standing upright in the face of betrayal from her own blood. Two older women walked past me. They didn't say a word. One of them gently touched my hand, a fleeting, quiet touch, the kind only people with matching scars know how to give. Marcus stepped closer. "Do you want to go now?" he asked. I shook my head. Not yet. Not this time. I looked at Daniel, at Madison, at the ballroom, the place where I had been humiliated only hours before. And then I said, without a microphone, but clear enough for everyone still there to hear, if anyone still thinks I'm weak, look again at tonight. I didn't come back to beg for kindness. I came back to reclaim my dignity, and that is something that even my own son had the right to take. Then I walked out of the ballroom. I didn't look back. I wasn't shaking. My cheek didn't burn anymore. Inside me was only one thing: peace. The kind you feel when you stop hiding who you are. Charleston's night air was still damp. The wind from the Ashley River cut through the cobblestone streets. I walked steady, hearing my heart beat slow, solid. And I knew from this moment my life would never be the same. No longer the Eleanor people looked down on, but Eleanor Parker who stood up and didn't need saving. I thought that once I walked out of that ballroom, everything would end. I was wrong. That moment was only the beginning. The moment the doors closed behind me, another door opened. Wider, brighter, and far more merciless. Public opinion, legal reality, and personal dignity. The next morning I woke up at 5 a.m., like I always do. I brewed black coffee, opened the curtains, and looked down at King Street. Charleston looked peaceful, untouched, as if last night never happened. But my old phone, the same one Madison once mocked, was lighting up nonstop. Missed calls, messages, emails, voicemails. Before I could touch the screen, the doorbell rang. It was Joseph, my neighbor. He held a folded newspaper in one hand and his old iPad in the other. His eyes were wide. "Eleanor, have you seen this?" I hadn't, until he set the newspaper on my kitchen table, front page, top corner. Mother slapped at son's wedding. What happened next shocked Charleston. Underneath was a photo, slightly blurry but unmistakable. Me, on my knees, gathering broken glasses off the floor. My face caught between pain and dignity. Before I could say a word, my phone rang again. Marcus. His voice was calm. "You don't need to check social media. People filmed everything. Madison slapping you, and then later when you came back with me, it's everywhere now." I sat down. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I felt like someone who had just been pulled from the shade into blinding sunlight. Marcus continued. "Reporters will reach out. They'll want your version. If you stay silent, someone else will speak for you. So if you want to talk, let me control the narrative." All I said was, "I don't want revenge. I just don't want the truth twisted." Marcus replied, "That's how you win." By noon, the doorbell rang again. Not Joseph, Daniel. He stood outside the hallway of my apartment, his hands in his pockets. His face looked older, like he had aged 10 years overnight. He asked quietly, "Mom, can I come in?" I looked at his polished shoes, then at my worn slippers. I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked slowly around the apartment like he was seeing it for the first time. The wooden dining table, the little kitchen, the window facing the street. Nothing had changed, except us. He sat down, didn't meet my eyes. His voice was hoarse. "Mom, I didn't know things had gotten this bad. I didn't know." I stopped him, not with anger, but with truth. "You didn't know because you didn't want to know." He stayed silent. I continued, steady and calm. "You knew Madison only saw this place as a real estate opportunity. You knew she wanted me in a nursing home. You knew people came here suggesting I was not mentally fit to manage my own finances. And you still sat there, saying nothing." Daniel shut his eyes. His hands clenched. Tears formed at the corners of his eyes, something I hadn't seen since he was a child. "Mom, I'm sorry." I nodded. "I still love you, but love isn't a shield you get to hide behind." Then I said something I never imagined I would say in 36 years of being his mother. You haven't lost me, but from now on you'll have to stand on your own, without my money, without my silence. He didn't argue. He just sat there, head bowed. Later that afternoon, Marcus came back. He placed a stack of documents on the coffee table. A formal order to stop all financial transfers to Daniel. Legal power of attorney forms to protect me from being declared incapacitated. And most importantly, an appointment with a local journalist. I asked quietly, "Do I need to go on television?" Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to perform. You just need to tell the truth for the people who are old enough to understand that silence isn't always noble." I looked down at the papers. I thought about Robert, my husband, how he held my hand before he died and said, "Don't let money destroy you." And I whispered to myself, I didn't let money destroy me. But I did let silence. That evening, as I made lavender tea, the phone rang again. Not Daniel, not Marcus, a TV show producer. Her voice was steady. "We want to tell your story, not for ratings, but because there are thousands of people out there, living in the same fear you once lived in." I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, Charleston streetlights fading into the night fog. Then I said, "I'll do it. But I won't tell it for revenge. I'll tell it so someone out there knows silence isn't always love." And that was when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. I wasn't just a victim. I had become a witness. From now on, my life wouldn't take place behind closed doors. It would step into the light. Because once the truth is spoken, no one can take it back. I never imagined that at 68 years old, I would be sitting in the makeup room of a national television studio. But life has a strange way of unfolding. Sometimes the things we never dared to picture for ourselves are the things that arrive the fastest. The room was cold. The white lights exposed every line on my face, the quiet marks of time I could no longer hide. A young woman attached a microphone to my collar, her hands gentle, almost frightened to hurt me. She whispered, "Mrs. Eleanor, millions of people will be watching this interview. Are you sure you still want to do it?" I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were no longer red from crying. Only calm remained. "No," I said. "I've been silent my whole life. Tonight I speak." The live program Voices of America began at 8 p.m. The host, Catherine Miller, looked at me with both respect and sorrow in her eyes. She began, "Tonight we tell the story of a mother who was slapped at her son's wedding. But that moment was only the beginning. This is a story about family, greed, and silence." Then she turned toward me. "Mrs. Eleanor, why didn't you fight back when you were slapped in front of 130 people?" I looked straight into the camera as if I were looking into the eyes of every person watching, and I spoke, clearly, without trembling, because in that moment I still loved the son who let it happen. The studio went silent. Then came a harder question. "So why did you finally choose to speak up?" I took a deep breath, remembering the broken glass on the ballroom floor, remembering how Daniel looked away from me, his own mother, because I realized if I stayed silent, I wouldn't just lose everything. My son would lose his soul. Catherine continued gently, "And that was when you revealed your finances to the world." I nodded. Not to boast, but to show them they didn't just slap a poor old woman. They slapped the same woman who had been quietly paying their debts every month. The interview lasted nearly an hour, and I told everything. The beach house in Hilton Head that no one knew about, the commercial building on Meeting Street, the $5.4 million investment account, the $4,500 I sent Daniel every month for 3 years just so he could breathe under his debts. And the slap, not to humiliate my son, but so that thousands of people watching, people who have been told they are burdens by their own children, would know they are not alone. At the end, Catherine asked the hardest question of all. If your son is watching this right now, what do you want to say to him? I looked into the camera. I didn't blink. Daniel, I am still your mother. I still love you. But love is not an excuse to hurt the person who gave you life. If you're ready to take responsibility, I'm still here. But if you choose silence, I will live the rest of my life without you, and I will still be at peace. The lights went off. Everyone in the studio stood up and applauded. Some of them, especially the older ones, were crying. That night, I walked back to the hotel with Marcus. My phone kept vibrating in my hand, not with hate, but with messages like these. Thank you. My daughter is trying to force me to sell my house too. You spoke for me, for all mothers who are being pushed aside. I'm 72, and today I decided not to hand my house keys to my son. I read each one. My heart ached and healed at the same time. 3 days later, Daniel showed up at my apartment door, alone. Without Madison, his eyes were swollen. His shirt was wrinkled. The arrogance was gone. He didn't knock. He just stood there like the little boy who once stood alone on the schoolyard waiting for me to come get him. I opened the door. He looked at me, voice trembling. Mom, I watched the interview. I know I was wrong. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I'm just asking you not to close the door. I looked at the son I thought I had lost, and I didn't see a failed man. I saw a boy I once held while he slept. I spoke softly. This door will never be closed to you. But you must walk through it with clean feet, not with tears and not with pride. Daniel nodded, and he cried. I didn't hug him, but I placed my hand on his shoulder, just enough to let him know. Coming back as my son wouldn't be easy, but it wasn't impossible. And Madison? She disappeared from my life like a shadow. I heard she moved back in with her parents. I don't hate her. I only pity her, because those who look down on others always end up revealing their own emptiness. As for me, I still live in my small Charleston apartment. I still make lavender tea every morning. I still drive my 10-year-old Ford. But one thing has changed. I am silent no more. I began writing a book about the elderly who are betrayed by their own families. I founded the Parker Foundation for the dignity of the elderly. I receive letters from all over the country, stories more painful than mine. And sometimes I see Daniel again. Not as mother and son, but as two human beings learning how to love each other. From the beginning, I never imagined that one day at 68 years old, I would walk into a courtroom, not to testify for someone else, but to prove that I was still sane enough to be considered a person. But that April morning, I stood in front of the Charleston County Courthouse. The wind slipped through my old coat, and my hands trembled around my small purse. Inside the courtroom, my son, Daniel, and his wife were already seated. Their attorney had filed a petition to have me legally declared incompetent, which meant they would gain full control over my estate, including the small apartment I live in. In other words, my own son was asking the court to declare that his mother was no longer legally human. The courtroom wasn't large, but every gaze inside felt like it landed on me. Some were reporters. Some had watched my television interview. Others were legal officials, people who only cared about evidence, procedures, and signatures. Daniel avoided my eyes. His face looked thinner than before, but his expression wasn't guilt. It was something colder, as if he was desperately clinging to a reason to justify everything he had done. Madison was different. She sat upright, clutching a stack of documents, her eyes hard and sharp. To her, I was not a mother-in-law. I was an obstacle, a final wall between her and survival. Their lawyer stood first, voice polished and calculated. Your Honor, my client, Daniel Parker, asserts that his mother, Eleanor Parker, shows signs of psychological decline and is no longer capable of making sound financial decisions. Evidence includes abruptly terminating financial support as a form of punishment, publicly revealing family information on television and refusing her son access. Each word sliced into me, not because I was afraid of losing my money, but because I was listening to my own son describe his mother as unstable, even insane. I looked at Daniel. He kept his eyes on the floor. Then Marcus, my attorney, stood up, calmly adjusted his glasses, and spoke. Your Honor, the only thing Mrs. Eleanor Parker has done is stop financially supporting an adult son who has repeatedly taken advantage of her love. She is not mentally unfit. She has simply chosen to stop being used. He placed a thick folder on the table. Proof of the debts I paid for Daniel over 3 years. Bank statements showing the $4,000 to $4,500 I transferred to him every month. The video of me being slapped at the wedding. Medical reports confirming I am physically healthy and cognitively sound. Then Marcus said one sentence that left the room silent. If this is how we treat a mother the moment she stops sacrificing herself, maybe the question isn't what's wrong with her, but what's wrong with the children who forgot how to be grateful. The judge asked me to stand and testify. I didn't read any statement. I didn't cry. I spoke like a mother who had nothing left to lose. I am not losing my mind. I am losing my patience. There was a soft murmur in the courtroom, but I kept going. I told them about Robert, my late husband, who built our wealth quietly and made me promise to protect our family, even if it meant living simply. About the years I pretended to be poor, working at a flower shop, so my son would learn the value of work, not the comfort of money. About the night my daughter-in-law slapped me in front of 130 people, and about the moment Daniel stood there, watching, saying nothing. And then I said something I had never said out loud in my life. I didn't bring my son into this courtroom. He dragged me here. Their lawyer fired back with something cruel. He played a clip from the TV interview, edited only the part where I said, I will live the rest of my life without my son if I must. They twisted it, used it as evidence that I was emotionally unstable. I saw Daniel's eyes flicker. He knew that video was cut. He knew it wasn't the full truth, but he stayed silent. For the first time, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt cold. Near the end, the judge, an older man, around 60, looked at me and asked, Mrs. Parker, if I dismiss your son's petition today, do you still intend to cut him out of your life? The question was a blade, but I answered calmly. No, I don't want to cut my son out of my life. I only want to cut the belief that he has the right to treat his mother like a bottomless wallet. I want him to learn how to be a man before demanding the assets of the woman who gave him life. In that moment, I saw Daniel's shoulders shake. The court did not give a verdict that day. The judge said he needed more time to review the evidence, testimony, and witness statements. But as I stepped down from the stand, I knew one thing for certain. Whether I won or lost legally, I had already won something much greater. I was no longer afraid of my own silence. Daniel stayed seated, eyes red, hands gripping the edge of his chair. For the first time, he didn't look away. He looked at me. And I let him see it all, my exhaustion, my disappointment, and the strength he never realized I had. This trial was not over, but the battlefield had changed. From now on, this was no longer about money, no longer about property. This was about truth, and a mother's love being tested in the harshest way possible. 1 year has passed since the day I walked out of the Charleston County Courthouse, my hands cold but my heart burning. I was no longer afraid. I no longer lowered my eyes in front of my son. But the pain was still there, like a stone left inside my chest, not easily moved or forgotten. The judge didn't give a verdict that day. He said he needed time, and I waited, not because I hoped to win against Daniel, but because I had one wish, that the truth wouldn't be twisted into greed. 6 weeks later, I was watering my lavender plants on the balcony when the phone rang. It was Marcus. He spoke only 3 words. Eleanor. We won. The court officially dismissed Daniel's petition. The ruling was clear. Mrs. Eleanor Parker is fully competent mentally and financially. But the judge added one sentence to the official record that made the entire courtroom go silent. The right to refuse being exploited is not a sign of incompetence. It is a sign of clarity. I put the phone down, but instead of joy, my eyes filled with tears. Winning in court didn't mean I got my family back. Daniel's collapse. A week later, Daniel came to see me. He didn't bring Madison. No lawyer, no documents. He stood at my door, hands in his pockets like a little boy who had lost his way. He didn't cry, but his eyes were swollen, his voice hoarse. Mom, you won. I don't have anything left to say, but if you want, I'll leave, for good. I looked at my son, the same child I once held in my arms 35 years ago. His once sleek hair was messy, his wedding day suit replaced by a worn-out jacket. I heard something break inside his voice, not because he lost money, but because he lost his mother. I only said, "You don't have to leave, but you will have to learn again how to be a son." Daniel lowered his head. It took him a long time before he finally looked up, and for the first time in months I pulled him into an embrace. It didn't erase what he did. It didn't fix everything. But it was the beginning of something greater than forgiveness. It was responsibility. And Madison? She never came back. She only sent an envelope. Inside was divorce paperwork and a short note. I'm sorry for everything, but I don't know how to be poor. I didn't get angry. I didn't reply. I only understood more clearly than ever. Greed isn't born from poverty. It's born from a lack of character. Life after that. I didn't return to my old life. I no longer work at the flower shop. I founded the Parker Foundation in Robert's name to help elderly people who are financially abused by their own families. I speak at universities. I write. I help people like me, people who stayed silent for too long, believing that suffering quietly was the price of keeping a family together. Daniel started visiting every Sunday, not to ask for money, not to beg for forgiveness, just to rebuild himself. He started over from nothing, sold the house, returned the car, took a low-paying job at a small office outside the city. But every Sunday, without fail, he knocked on my door and said, "Mom, I'm still here." 2 years later, I was sitting in our old beach house in Hilton Head, the place I never dared to return to because Robert's memory was too strong. The ocean breeze brushed through my hair. The scent of salt, old pine, and waves felt like a late apology from life. Daniel walked up the porch steps, not with guilt in his eyes anymore, but humility. He placed an envelope in my hand. Inside was a document, his signed request to remove himself entirely from my estate. He said, "I don't want your money. I just want you to live long enough to see me become a decent man again." I looked at my son. The boy I thought I lost had returned. Not perfect, but real. I didn't sign that paper. Instead, I tore it gently and said, "Inheritance isn't money. Inheritance is the kind of life you choose to live." Is this an ending or a beginning? Maybe you're listening to this from Dallas, or Seattle, or New York, or from a small town like mine in South Carolina. Maybe you're a mother, quietly hurting. Maybe you're a son or daughter, angry, misunderstood. Maybe you're just someone looking for a reason to believe that kindness still exists. So let me leave you with this. Life doesn't always end in forgiveness, but it can end in truth. And sometimes truth is enough to start again. If this story touched you, leave a comment and tell me. Where are you listening from? And if you want to hear more true stories like this, click subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, or send a small super thanks so I know I'm not telling these stories alone.